Welcome to the Waggle Room. When honeybees return to the hive, they perform a waggle dance, not to give answers, but to share signals, direction, distance, quality and possibility. Many dances can happen at once, different options, different signals, all moving through the colony together. Over time, patterns form, attention shifts, some signals fade, others gather momentum, and a way forward begins to emerge. Humans do this too, in groups, communities, in moments of uncertainty, long before anything feels clear or settled. The Waggle Room is a space to notice those signals, explore the systems they sit within, and make sense of what's emerging. Signals, systems, sense-making.
Welcome everyone to the Waggle Room. I've got a fantastic guest tonight, which we will go into in a minute. I'll let him introduce himself, but I want to start off with a little bit of a thought really about what happens when an idea so powerful almost gets corrupted just by people spreading it. And that idea is John Boyd's OODA loop. And the reason I say that is Mark, or Moose as he's known to his friends, spent years going back to sort of the original source material of John Boyd and OODA. And he spent a lot of time in the archives. And I think one of his missions is to almost rescue it in some sense. A lot of these things, it gets taken, corrupted, flattened into like a checklist or a circle, as most probably consultants push it out as. And yeah, I want to get into that because it's really, really important. I was luckily enough, Mark invited me onto his podcast ages ago, and in that conversation, I even started to have thoughts as we were talking about OODA and actually what bees do. So it fits really well into the whole thing to do with how bees orientate and make decisions. So yeah, we'll get into that a little bit and really what the time and effort it takes to go back and look at all that material and find out what's going on. So like I say, I was lucky. Mark invited me on his podcast. It was podcast 32, I think. In fact, I looked tonight. It was it wasn't far off. Well, it's well over 2.5 years ago. Can you believe?
That's a while ago. Yeah. Time flies, huh?
It's mad. So yeah, mate, I'll hand over to you and let you do a little bit of intro on yourself because you've got an amazing history as well.
Sure. Well, it's an honor to be here. Hopefully you can tolerate a native-born Kentuckian that lives in Manhattan, because as you no doubt are surrounded by people that speak the King's English. You know, we don't speak it over here. But no, it's good to be back with you, Mick. I'll hit on a couple of things that you said. So yeah, I've dedicated my life's work to building off of John Boyd's life work, and part of that is, as you say, rescuing, but part of that is preserving the integrity of the authenticity of his work in order to help people more effectively apply it within organizations. And there's a lot more than just Boyd that we integrate when we do that. But Boyd is a great foundation specifically around the concept of orientation and how that affects. And that's really that's the big wedge, I think, between us and what I would call the big box consulting world that flattens Boyd into a linear circle that is exactly what you want your competitors to be operating with in the pursuit of building on his life's work, which was his intent. I mean, he left it open for guys like me and Ponch and others to keep tearing it up and challenging it and building onto it and adding onto it, which we do pretty extensively, as you know, from just being a follower of our work and a previous guest on our show and a consumer of the things that we put out. And the reason that's important is because an authentic understanding of Boyd, where you're oriented effectively, allows you and empowers you to compound more things on top of Boyd to further differentiate yourself from your competitors. So I had to build all of this out of my, I was an officer in the Marine Corps, U.S. Marine Corps for 6 years. And I developed all this just autodidactically, thinking that what they had taught me, there was a lot more to it. And I was right. There is a lot more to it. And it never stops, by the way. It's an ongoing, continuous process, which is great for someone like me with ADHD that never wants to stop learning anyway. But then seeing it live in just over 15 years in the Wall Street world of asset management, seeing it applied, seeing it in action daily and learning how to apply it and refine it better and better such that I could teach it to others that they can take it in any place that they operate. And I work with an array of clients across a lot of different industries that take the concepts and, you know, in earnest, my goal is to effectively help them understand them as Boyd intended, and then build off of that. And then they end up building a massive competitive and collaborative edge.
The fact it's called the OODA loop,
Yeah.
you're one of the leaders in this, but even me going and reading the stuff and reading the book on John Boyd, obviously it's not even drawn as a loop.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact it's called a loop, and I know you specifically don't use the word loop a lot of the time when you're speaking about it. Do you think
Usually
that's
in
almost
quotes. Yeah,
yeah?
usually OODA loop sketch and with loop and quotes, and almost always saying John Boyd's OODA loop and quotes sketch, because that's really what people screw up the most, is they don't understand that. And he only drew it one time. And when they understand what he's putting into it, and more importantly why he's doing that, then they're going to see it in a completely different light than how they may have been instructed by a consultant, or, marksmanship training or anything like that. There's so much more to John Boyd than what he's remembered for. And, that does become a big part of the mission. I mean, we're not trying to build a granite monument to John Boyd. He would hate that. What we're trying to do is run down what it is that he was actually trying to teach us. And then as we understand that authentically, and we have a lot of interaction with those that were known as his acolytes, if you've read the book, like Chet Richards, Chuck Spinney, G.I. Wilson, and others, including his daughter, Mary Boyd, who was, Mary was his administrative assistant and did all the creation of the decks that he used. So, and then you mentioned we've spent an inordinate amount of time in the archives trying to, again, get to the root of what Boyd's driving at. And it's a lot more than decisions. It's a lot more than fast little circles. There's a lot more to it. And when that a lot more becomes apparent, then once you see it, you can't unsee that. And that's really where it becomes a very powerful cognitive weapon.
And this is from my own perspective as well. When I first started to look at it, and then I saw the link to the fact that he was a fighter pilot, so people go into this thinking he must have come up with this when he was doing that, that job. But actually, the more you start reading about it, that's not actually what happened, was it? Was it quite near the end of his writing that he actually came up with what you'd class as the OODA loop?
Yeah, I mean, he came up. Well, the drawing of the OODA loop sketch was right before he died, around 1996, about a year before he died. Now, in the archives, you can track and kind of piece together the clues that he lays out of how he was coming to that. And the big takeaway is he's not thinking flat, linear, circular. He's thinking in terms of complexity. He's thinking in terms of uncertainty. And the fighter pilot experience, while it was important to his career and his story, it does veer it off into legend when it comes down to the intellectual work that we're talking about, because it was something that he went back and reevaluated. It's not something that he configured when he was a fighter pilot. So it was something that he went back to reflect on. It's not something it was not his starting point. His starting point was what I would define as, becoming orientation. It really goes back to that cycle of destruction and creation. And that's probably the best place to start. It's how do we destroy old mental models and create new mental models? That was basically the core of his work. When people haven't read Destruction and Creation, or they don't understand Destruction and Creation, anything Boyd at that point won't matter to them, because they're never going to get it, because everything that he does from that point on is building off of Destruction and Creation. It's critical to his work. Now, as you know, it's not a very big, it's like depending on the version that you get, it's like 8 or 11 pages, not just depends on what size font they used or whatever. It's not very big, but it is very dense, and it is important. And most people don't get that. And that's kind of our, like when I'm teaching it, that's kind of the starting point is helping them understand destruction creation first. And I don't know, I feel like I'm getting better and better at it in the sense that I can explain it to people without having to get too scientific or too technical, which is great because I am not I'm a history major undergraduate and a economist by master's training. So to be able to articulate it in non-scientific, non-engineering terms, I think that's where people start to, that's when it starts to click with them. They start to understand it. And then, like I said, once you see it, you can't unsee it.
The Coram book about him, the one thing that stuck in my head is a lot of people sort of classed him as being a bit of a pain in the ass, didn't they?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because he was very, although he was in the Air Force, and you could, people have got biases around what they think being in the military is anyway. So you have this hierarchical structure. I think it's fair to say he wasn't afraid to sort of call out bullshit, which maybe didn't do him any favors if climbing the ladder, as if you like.
Yeah, that turned a lot of people off. And you had a lot of people that were defending legacy weapon systems or legacy programs that had become obsolete, but still had a lot tied into it. And then the way he delivered it was blunt. He could be a very blunt instrument. And then the fact people would ride him because he didn't have the quote unquote credentials. He was not a PhD. He was not an Ivy Leaguer. He didn't go to an academy. So, people would try to ostracize him that way, but it always backfired on them. Always backfired on them. And they never understood his core argument. And his core argument was basically that independent action, free and independent action is what we have to strive for. And the only way that we can do that is by dealing with, by constantly breaking down our models and revising them to new ones to deal in the uncertain, incomplete world that's always subject to entropy and disorder, that we're also subject to scarcity, and scarcity produces conflict. And conflict is not just limited to military forces. Conflict is everything. It's cold out, so I'm in conflict with the weather. I have a sweater, for example. So that's a critical component of it. And if you don't get that, it doesn't matter. Everything else is just going to go down. So people will say, well, I'm going to use OODA loop here, or I'm going to use OODA in this situation, but not that situation. Or OODA is a decision-making model. OODA is a mindset. All that's just BS. And it's going to lead you to ruin. That misunderstanding is going to lead you down the wrong path.
You're going to tell me if I'm wrong, but his little dictum was something like people, ideas, machines, in that order.
Yeah, it was in that order.
We're so bad at always fixating on the thing.
Yeah.
So I've literally today been at a Microsoft AI event in London, right? All of it was about the thing. You know what I mean? It's all about the tool. And I think people just you say, oh yeah, it's all about the people. But they're just left sort of hanging on the back of the thing that everyone's trying to push.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, people like tech and money and other physical things that distract them from the moral and mental realities of things. And that's people, ideas, things, strategy, operations, tactics, moral, mental, physical. I mean, these things, when they're broken down in threes, people tend to gravitate on what's right in front of them or what they can feel tangibly. What Boyd is challenging us to do is think that, to survive on our own terms, we have to think differently. And to think differently, we have to constantly pull apart what it is that we see and reassemble it in ways that we didn't think, no one ever thought to do before, to create novelty, to generate mismatches, to identify gaps, to isolate our opponents. Those are the types of things that most people aren't thinking about when they're thinking about John Boyd. They're thinking about, how do I operate inside of a circular decision loop, and how do I increase the speed of that loop, because speed kills, or speed is prime. And that basically, when somebody says that, it means that you don't understand John Boyd. It's not. Speed is downstream from orientation. It's okay to be fast, but if you're disoriented, it doesn't matter. You're just going fast in the wrong direction.
I've watched so many of your podcasts, and for everyone out there, if you want to subscribe to an awesome podcast, then go and subscribe to No Way Out. It's fantastic. I watched one the other day. It was a retired Marine. And in that conversation, it came up about, I think it was you that said like orientation is like the center of gravity or something like that. Someone definitely said that line on that podcast.
Yeah, it was me. Yeah. So he wrote a book about Boyd called Speed Kills, which is, I would say it's a good starter book, I guess. It's like anything with anything, you can look at it from all sorts of angles. I just wouldn't stop there. It's not there's more complete. If you read it, it's not wrong to read that book. If you read it and only that and thought you knew everything about Boyd, you'd fail. Just like if you just listened to our podcast and thought you knew everything about Boyd, you'd fail. If you just read our articles on the world of reorientation, and thought that was everything about Boyd, you'd fail. Now you got to do a lot more research. And what Ponch and I do, and as following Boyd, is that you can't just limit it to one person and one personality, because when you get into Boyd's corpus, there's so many categories that he covered and so many disciplines that he pulled from across a career, an intellectual path for him that lasted, depending on how you define when it started, anywhere from 20 to 40 years of nonstop work in a world pre-internet, pre-AI, so this guy is a sensational thinker, and we're likely not going to see somebody like that for a long, long time.
One of the things you talk about is almost there are ideas in there which we've almost now got, we call them something, like complex adaptive systems. That wasn't necessarily words that were used when he was writing things, but as you read his work, those things, are now something that people, that's the words they use. He talks a lot of stuff about neuroscience, which we wouldn't necessarily have called it that when he was writing about those, when he was writing about them.
He was very forward thinking in that respect. So like if you read, and this is a critical source, Science, Strategy, and War by Franz Osinga, when you read that, there is a whole section on complexity and complex adaptive systems. And it's important because, as you said, Boyd wasn't necessarily using the terminology we're familiar now, but he was describing it. And he was an early speaker at Santa Fe Institute. He was in and around that world. And he kind of led himself that way because he didn't limit himself to science or engineering. He was getting a very well-rounded and very, I won't say complete because, that would go against him, but like it was more interdisciplinary on how these things all connected, but leading into complexity science and complex adaptive systems is definitely one thing that he did.
I find interesting, and I spoke to Ponch about this actually. So, he was in the U.S. Air Force.
Yeah.
So how come the U.S. Marines are the sort of that's where you hear most of Boyd being talking about from a military perspective? Because when I spoke to Ponch, he said to me, "Oh yeah, they talked about it when he was doing his pilot training, but it wasn't that ingrained." But from a US Marines point of view, it seems to almost be the other way around. So what happened there for him to get sort of taken under the wing of the US Marine?
Yeah, that's where I first heard of Boyd. I was actually a midshipman at a Naval Reserve Officer Training Corps here in the United States at university, and it was my second year, and I was taking a course called The Evolution of the Art of War, and this was in 1995, and they were talking about the Boyd cycle. And the Boyd cycle was a very observer-oriented side act. I mean, the way it was taught was very linear. The way it's often referred to within the warfighting curriculum in the Marine Corps for officers, and all Marines, not just limited to officers, but I was getting it through Officer Basic School and others, that Boyd was heavily influential on this. And what happened, to go back to the story of how the Marines wound up having a Air Force fighter pilot as their intellectual godfather, it goes back to the Vietnam War. And after the Vietnam War, the Marines were trying to figure out what happened. Like this did not go the way it should have, given that we had all the stuff, we had all the tools, all the talent, all the treasure, and we lost. And some of the other services, I think, again, I'm speaking very generally because, we would need more time to really get into a lot of these specifics. But generally speaking, one of Boyd's criticisms was people would just take the old strategy and slap a new coat of paint on it and call it the new strategy, and that's how we're going to get through it the next time. Boyd knew that there was more to that, so he did a lot more of the of the soul searching, and he attracted a lot of soul searchers. So there were people like Andrew Krapinovich, and there were people like Bruce Palmer that had written books on like why the army didn't do so well in Vietnam. And he was very well versed in a lot of the guerrilla warfare doctrine, a lot of things that Mao had written and Guevara had written, Lenin even. He had studied these things, and he was also very familiar with the guerrilla interactions with the Marine Special Forces and the U.S. Army Special Forces and the Marine Corps' Combined Action Program. He'd studied Malaya, the Malaya emergency. He had looked at all these things, and he knew that something had to be done differently at the core. It wasn't enough to just slap a new coat of paint. And looking into ground warfare, after he had written Destruction and Creation, he started to see that the principles that he was talking about in Destruction and Creation, he said, let's apply all that, or let's look at these things. Let's try to get everything in recorded history that we could find about warfare. And what he tried to do is isolate patterns, was where probably his most famous briefing, although I would argue not his most important or critical, but his most famous, and one of the best from an application standpoint, and when he's most well known for, patterns of conflict. He goes back from all recorded history, tries to look at every single military operation that he can and identify patterns of what was leading to success, what was leading to failure. And what he figured out was that it was those that were undergunned, undermanned, underfunded that were winning. And he's like, well, why? What were they doing differently? Where they were using a variety and optionality, and he talks about rapidity, and he talks about harmony, and he talks about initiative, and he talks about how the Germans broke the stalemate in the First World War in the trenches with night infiltration tactics, and he talks about blitzkrieg, and he talks about Entebbe in 1976, and how it had started for him. And he talks about this in Powers of Conflict is, they're trying to find a better fighter jet. That's kind of how he stumbled into things. But what ended up happening, how the Marine Corps heard him. So there's this rogue retired Air Force colonel that everybody hates because he's telling it like it is, and he has novel ideas. And he gives this brief for several hours. And if you're dumb enough to sit through it, I guess you could do that. But I guess there were some people that were quote unquote dumb enough to sit through it. And some of them happened to be in real interesting positions. So I think William Lind was one of those that was working for, I think, Senator Gary Hart at the time. There was, I think he was then a colonel, Alfred M. Gray, who became the commandant of the Marine Corps eventually. There were somehow somebody heard it, and a Marine heard it and told Mike Wiley, who was a Marine colonel who ran the amphibious warfare school, now known as expeditionary warfare school. Hey, you got to listen to this guy. Give him some time. And that's how it really had started. Somebody gave Boyd the time. Boyd helped him do the work, and Boyd started a very long and healthy relationship with the Marine Corps that lasted all the way to his death in 1997. G.I. Wilson, who was one of his primary collaborators, who's been a guest on our show and is a good friend and mentor, talks about meeting Boyd for the first time in 1909 and basically interacting with him all the way till his death. And G.I. was influential in helping get him into the Marine Corps. But yeah, the one organization that he had the most influence on was the Marines. And right, makes sense, because the Marines are always looking for ways to do things better, to do things differently, to do it better than the Army or the Air Force or the Navy would, right? That's a big motivation. And being a Marine is a cognitive operating system. There are physical traits, yet at the same time, really the difference, I think, is the cognitive operating system that Marines have versus which is the rest of the world.
He says what he says on a podcast with a guy from ex-military in the British Army. Do you know what? The whole time I was in the military, never heard anyone speak about it.
Yeah.
The training you get as a squaddy or a soldier is different than what you get if you go to Sandhurst as an officer. I'm sure at Sandhurst they probably go through, it comes up in some shape or form, but I can only imagine, given the length of time that they've got to learn bits and pieces there, it's probably not the OODA that you would hope it would be. I just find it fascinating that it's not something that's embedded in the British military.
Yeah, I mean, inherently it is, right? I mean, because people that are successful are inherently doing these things,
Yeah.
what Boyd is talking about, it's very descriptive. I mean, he's discovering things that are how people work and how the universe works and how cognition works and how neuroscience works and complexity works, et cetera. I mean, in a lot of sense, he's a discoverer, explorer that's describing us and teaching all this stuff and then showing us how to basically tap into it. And there's a lot of great British examples that predate Boyd where just think anywhere you had great success, you could apply this lens of thinking on it and look at it and see how someone was oriented differently than somebody else and how somebody was maximizing on things like speed and surprise and other things. At the same time, if you've ever read Norman Dixon's book, on the psychology of military incompetence, which he was a British soldier and a psychologist, he wrote all of his examples are pretty much British. You know, there's a lot of other failures, but in studying those failures, you can see it's all a difference of orientation. It's really what
Yeah.
it comes down to every single time. You've
In
not
fact,
read that book? Have you read that book?
no, I'm going to have to read that. But another book that's so the Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare. Have you ever read
Oh
that?
yeah. And I think there's a film coming out about that.
Knowing about OODA and reading that book, Churchill was trying to get SOE stood up, but the actual like cement layer of what used to be the hierarchy within what before it became the Ministry of Defence, he
Yeah.
couldn't get people to buy into it, so he just circumnavigated,
Yeah.
just completely went round it.
Yeah, commando stories, and Boyd talks a lot about these, but like, yeah, commandos, things like that are very fascinating to me because they were oriented differently, and not only were they oriented differently, in that case, in many cases, they're always able to do a lot more with a whole lot less. So
Yeah.
I find those sorts of groups like, I don't know if you've ever read like the the real life stories. So like that is an example. Dusko Popov, other ones that like Ian Fleming knew, and he based James
Oh,
Bond
right.
on. I
Yeah.
mean, there's the SOE in the UK, and then the Office of Strategic Services in the US. I mean, these were riddled with fascinating, interesting characters that were just, again, they're not boring stories at all. These are
No.
not boring stories. But really what it comes down to is, yeah, they had a different orientation. So they saw things differently. They were able to come up with different decisions, actions, and learning faster than the rate of change. And that's why they were successful. And I think a lot of times that's what has to happen. You have to have those sorts of, I don't want to call them extreme, but maybe extreme, those sorts of prominent examples of somebody doing something so differently that's the only, that was the breakthrough. They're the ones that were able to get a lot of movement where muscle and might didn't do it. You
Well, I
know?
mean, a perfect example of that. Look what's going
Mm.
look what's going on in Ukraine. Talk about doing as much as you can with
Oh, what was I just reading?
not much. It's crazy.
I was just reading something, but it was whoever was the field marshal of the British Army at the time was basically saying, this was Blitzkrieg. He basically said, let them attack. We're ready. Like, it's like, they got nothing to worry about. We're ready for them. There's another one, Seeds of Disaster, about the French military, in the Blitzkrieg. It all came down to orientation. Really, it just how they looked at it, how they thought about it, how they were so sold on their own invincibility of the Maginot Line. And the one thing that they were right about, the Maginot Line worked.
Mm,
But when
yeah.
people go around it or over it, I guess it's not as effective as people going through it. So nobody went
Yeah.
through the Maginot Line. They went around it and went over it anyway.
Yeah, it's, I mean, the whole orientation thing is that the fascination when it comes to bees. I think, just like I said on your podcast, you can actually watch them doing orientation flights when you move them to a new location. That's actually what they do. They
Yeah.
have to remap the terrain which they're now seeing because it looks different from where they've just been.
I mean, that's it. So that's a great, Mick, you just hit a really good example for people to think of. I mean, just think of orientation as your map of the world. And if you're not updating that map, then then you're not going to be successful. You have to constantly keep updating and revising that map because the terrain is always changing and the conditions and the climate, everything around you is always changing. So you have to keep updating and updating and updating and updating.
I mean, I'm just thinking about this now is, so you've got an organization and they're successful, and a lot of that's probably is based on their orientation and understanding what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And then because they're successful, organization B looks at organization A and says, well, we'll do exactly what they've done. But their orientation's different. But we're so like, if you take it from like a consultancy perspective,
Mm-hmm.
this, it's worked in organization A, which is all based on their orientation, but we're just going to shift and lift and put it there. And then everyone's like, oh, it doesn't seem to work there. But this gets the thing I find interesting about it is people are willing to pay for the thing that works over there, but they know hasn't worked anywhere,
Yeah.
hasn't worked anywhere else. It's like madness.
Yeah, it works somewhere, it becomes obsolete, and they don't think for a minute. They think, well, I'm just going to copy that and apply it. A lot of the consultants, I'd say that we're very different from the work that Ponch and I do. We're not doing that. We're not trying to
Yeah.
imitate things. We're trying to teach people, one, that they have the power to do this themselves, and two, what it's going to take is for them to have a more effective internal map of how the world works, because that internal map or that orientation is going to shape how you sense, how you decide, how you act, and how you learn as time moves forward. And if you can't break that down and build it back together, break that down and build it back together in ways that didn't exist previously, then there's no way that you're going to be successful. Boyd would call it the constructing the snowmobile,
Yeah.
looking at different domains and then taking pieces from each domain and then creating something novel that didn't previously exist. That's really important. And there's a big why behind it. Well, the why is the scientific reality of incompleteness, uncertainty, and entropy. And if you don't understand those and don't address those things, then you're never going to be able to reorient effectively. And Boyd knew this in his studying, that there's a physical imperative for this. There's a biological imperative for this. There's an evolutionary imperative for this. So things that change, things have to change and they have to adjust. If they don't, they become irrelevant. They become obsolete or extinct.
Yeah. If you go into an organization, somebody wants to engage you, but they're not willing to sort of put that, there is no one answer to one side.
Mm-hmm.
What's your next approach then? Is it, well, this probably isn't going to work, or, because it's a tough thing, that, isn't it? If somebody's just like, well, no, I want you to come in here and tell us exactly how to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, we can show them. So that's a great point. So I think that if you just went around handing out formulas and templates, it's the opposite of what we're doing. We're not doing that. We're not walking around and saying, here, this worked for this company, do this. This worked for us in the military. Or this is what fighter pilots do, or this is what Navy SEALs do, or Marines do. So do this. It's none of that.
Yeah.
Here's the thinking that you need to change yourself organically, and what you need to do will become very apparent to you once you understand that. And clients would tell you that, yeah, they've never told me exactly what to do as it relates to the day-to-day of my business, because I'm not a basketball player, or I'm not a lawyer, or I'm not a whatever. But once I help them break those models and show them how those models are written and revising inside of their cognitive software, and how they interact with others on their team, and how they isolate opponents and that kind of thing, then everything that they need to do becomes apparent. So if I'm working with an American football coach, should I say American? Because, over there, you guys call football something different. But if I'm working with an American gridiron football coach, a lot of times they're going to think that I'm there to show them what kind of offense to run or what kind of defense to run, and I'm not. What I'm there is to help them challenge and break their cognitive models that are impeding their forward progress. And once they get, that's a football pun, an American football pun, but basically impede their evolution or their ability to achieve free and independent action. And once I show them how to do that, they're going to figure out what plays to call. They're going to figure out what drills to run. I'm not going to have to tell them to do that. That's the cool part of this, because most people are looking for hardware as a solution. They're looking for hardware or templates or formulas or money. They think that that's the solution, but really it's not. It's how do effective insights, to create the right vision that they can direct and focus to those things and become more adaptable. That's
Yeah,
that's really what it boils down to.
yeah. It's again in well, I suppose when you think about people, ideas, things, when you've gone back and looked at a lot of what he was writing about,
Hmm.
is there because what is the topic of the day, AI, is there any writing around that type of thing in there? And I'm just wondering what, again, this is a projection sort of thing. I mean, I wonder what he would have thought about where we are or where we're headed
Mm.
with that type of technology.
So this comes up a lot. We talk about this a lot. Boyd would not be opposed to new technology. Boyd was not an anti-technology guy, so long as technology was in the focus of technology was in the proper order, as you mentioned, people, ideas, and
Yeah,
things. So AI should, if this is my argument, AI should, if as I look at OODA loop sketch, if I'm doing AI correctly, if I'm doing it effectively, it should enhance my orientation. And that orientation enhancement should allow me to see things quicker, make decisions faster, learn quicker, learn more effectively than if I wasn't using it, right?
yeah.
AI is a complete replace, because I think really what the argument often comes down to is like AI is a complete replacement for all humankind, and we're not. I don't think we're there yet, and I think that when we talk with clients and others about AI, again, when done right, AI is an effective enhancement, or can be an effective enhancement of one's orientation. I don't know how you're using AI. I don't know how others are using AI, but I find that the more that I use AI, the more learning I end up doing. So
100%.
yeah, like I feel like I've read more books in the last 5 years than I've read, in the 20 before that. And a lot of it comes from the ability of AI to uncover blind spots that I hadn't previously thought of. I don't know if you use Google Notebook LM, but
Yeah.
it's the greatest thing ever. I've learned more from Google Notebook LM than the overwhelming majority of my university professors, professors in grad school. It's been a great refresher course for me. Like, like for example, for my graduate training in economics, of books that I can find that are available on PDF and upload them into Notebook LM, and to have conversations with it and to say, hey,
Oh,
explain
I
this to
know.
me
It's
again.
mad.
And hey, show me again and whatever. And, to have it done visually through a deck or a video or a slide. I mean, that's helping me. That's helping me learn. Now, I still read books. I still underline things. I still take notes, but I don't do those things exclusively anymore. I've augmented how I take in information from a work standpoint. And this is, go back, if you're familiar with Isaac Asimov and Buckminster Fuller, they talked about the importance of automation of education. One of the things that they imagine, they basically are predicting AI, but they're saying that all the tedious stuff that you no longer have to do, that you can actually focus on the learning. I don't have to drive myself to the library. I don't have to go into the library and go to the card catalog. I don't have to write down on an index card the Dewey Decimal numbers of the books that I need in the card catalog. I don't have to go find those books in the stacks. I don't have to take those books off and check them out. I don't have to go through those books and go through the index. I mean, you're talking about hours, sometimes days of work. And I know that because I went to university as a history major in a pre-Google world, in a world where the internet was extremely nascent, and all of my academic output was manual.
Yeah.
I can't imagine what it had been like the opposite way, to not have not have those technologies available. I mean, try to explain to a kid a rotary phone
I
today,
know.
or,
Well, the
or
funny it's crazy you bring that up because I went up in my attic space the other week and I've got my granddad's original Bakelite phone where you
yeah,
pick up and I just did a little bit of maintenance on it and got it all working. And I've got 10-year-old twins and we took it
yeah.
apart. They were fascinated with the inside of it. They couldn't get their head around it.
Or
It was crazy.
explain a cassette tape. Like a recording cassette tape that people can't even they can't even
No.
fathom that. No. Or like when music would come out and you'd have to wait in line and you'd have to pay and you'd pay a lot of money and you couldn't have access to all the music. If you wanted that, you'd have to go to the
Yeah.
library. I remember I used to go to the library and I would check out albums and then I would come home and I would record them from record to cassette tape so I could have all the
Yeah.
Beatles albums, or I could have all, whatever it was. But now I can have the entire thing on I have access to the entire available music catalog, and I'm learning songs from the 80s that I had never heard of. And I grew up in the
Yeah.
80s, and there's songs I never heard of. Why? Because if it wasn't on the radio, you had to have the album. And if you didn't have the album, you never would have heard certain songs. In my family, we had all the Beatles and like Beach Boys albums. So like I knew that whole catalog, but some of these others like that had really robust catalogs like Prince,
Yeah.
I've read that Prince, about 80% of his catalog's never even been published
That's right. Yeah.
to begin with, which is crazy when you think about it. But like I got this one playlist. It was the Capitol Records Jazz Collection. And I love jazz. I like all kinds of music, but jazz is one I really like. I had never heard this stuff before. And again, it's the access to the catalog. Why? Because I didn't have like 50, 100 albums like stacked in my apartment somewhere or my house somewhere. Like I had to, you couldn't hear it all. It's impossible. And you still can't hear it all. But if I want to find something really quick, I can find it. Or it used to frustrate the hell out of me when you'd be somewhere and you're like, oh my God, listen, what is that song? Oh, I don't know. What is that? Does anybody know? Do you know? Maybe my mom knows. She's old enough, Now all I do is the Shazam app, and like I can look at, bam, it's The Who, or bam, it's David Bowie, or whatever it is. It's a different world that we live in. But that's technology serving people, and what it does, it's reorienting. I don't know. We could go down that rabbit hole too, because one of the things I talk a lot about specifically, is the work of Marshall McLuhan. And Marshall McLuhan said the medium is the message. And what that means is that our technology and our environment work us over completely. So whether we accept it or not, whether we use AI or not, or whether we like it or not, or whatever, it's still having an effect on us. It's still having an effect on our environment. And that's working us over as people. It's changing who we are. It's changing how we think. It's changing how we do business. It's changing how we learn. It's changing a lot of things.
Oh yeah. It's coming the weekend. My kids with using Lovable and a bit of Claude, they've put together a 3D printing website. I mean, they're 10 years old.
Yeah.
It's well, it's mad. The speed is going at, but I remember watching my brother. My brother's a software engineer, and he got a ZX81. It was at the time, like one of the first home computers, and that's how he taught himself to code. And then we got the ZX. He got a ZX Spectrum, which was the next one up, and we used to sit there watching my dad. We actually had to load the games on a cassette tape for 45 minutes, listening to white noise. It was like being back on interrogation. To watch my dad play Flight Simulator. So yeah, it's
I mean, there's an example, like when you think of a flight simulator on your Apple Macintosh from 1986 versus your flight simulator now. I mean, are you worse off because you have now what you didn't have then? Does that make people worse off? I don't think so. I think it trains people to be better. I think it allows them the idea to reorient in a way that they hadn't thought before.
I've been working in an AI lab for the last 3 years, and the thing that's has been very interesting speaking to you tonight is just something I completely overlooked, to be honest. But it's reaffirmed that maybe we've gone about things in the best way we can. Is we definitely have taken the sort of people, ideas, things approach, which has sort of made me confirm that we've done all right. But it's an interesting space to work in for sure. But you can't sit on one side or the other with this thing. It's not black or white. Anyone that says they know what's going to go on with it, or if it's going to end humanity, or if it's going to bring abundance to humanity, me and you can make just as good as prediction as Sam Altman or Dario Amodei. I mean, no one knows for sure.
I feel like I lean more towards the, it could go dark, it could go light, I don't know. But like, I lean more towards the abundance. I think that just like the internet brought abundance to the world. I think that we're in a position with AI. It's not, I feel like, I mean, the technology is only going to get better. It's just only,
Yeah.
it's only getting better and better and better and better. I also think too, it's showing obsolescence on so much that we don't need anymore.
Yeah.
Just like the internet did. The internet did the same thing. You don't need this anymore.
Yeah.
So
So I've got one more question to ask you, right? But
yeah.
it's the same question I ask everyone. But before I do that, I want to give everyone an opportunity. Mate, you do so much stuff, right? You've got the podcast, the Substack, the company. I just give a shout out to everyone that's listening about where they can go and find, because the essays you write on Substack are absolutely fantastic.
Can you
Yeah,
see it?
got it.
I don't know if it's
Yeah, that's showing.
Yeah, so it's theworld.substack.com. And when you go to it, there you go. You can see everything there. So when you go to thewhirl.com, WHR, the whirl of reorientation, and it comes from John Boyd from Conceptual Spiral, which is destruction and creation on steroids. It's my easy way to describe it. That there's no way out of the whirl of reorientation. So No Way Out is the name of the podcast, and the whirl of reorientation is the Substack. And Ponch and I are the co-creators of the podcast. And then I started the Substack, and then now that Brian and I are on it full time now. So, and we have the podcast integrated here as well. So it's really, those two have become our gardens, so to speak, in our classrooms. And that's, we have it that way for that reason. So we direct clients to it all the time. Yeah, go back and listen to our episode on this, or go back. A great thing to do is to take an episode, and you can find No Way Out podcast. These are all of our episodes, and we have I think we're up to 160 or so now. Got a couple to upload here. And then we have, if you click on No Way Out TV, I don't know if it's showing up there, but No Way Out TV right here, that's our YouTube channel. So you can check out our YouTube channel. I always tell people, just hit the start here button, and this is where we really get down to the sort of the basics, if you will, about Boyd and his work. And then another tab that I started is the Guerrilla Information War. And that's what Marshall McLuhan described World War III as: a guerrilla information war with no division between military and civilian participation. And he said that in the late 60s, early 70s. And we've been subject to this for some time. And, you mentioned, whether it's AI, social media, or whatever, we're all involved in this, whether we like it or not. So a lot of these articles here are about the guerrilla information war. So McLuhan is one of the ones that I've melded with Boyd a lot. And the better you understand Boyd, the easier it is to understand McLuhan, and vice versa. When you understand both of them, it makes you even more effective. So yeah, I just think if you go to theworld.substack.com, you can book us to speak. So Ponch and I appear on podcasts, as you all know, as I'm doing right now. You can book us here. You can see samples of some of our interviews and work that we've done. And then the World Bookshelf is sort of 5 primary books that have been very influential to what we do here. And then any book that we add, or any book that we have an article about or a discussion about, we just start adding them. There's the Quorum book and the John Robb books and Bill Walsh and everything else. So it's meant to be, the whirl is meant to be a classroom, a school for leaders, if you will. Anybody can subscribe. Doesn't cost anything. If you want to participate and leave comments or whatever, those are reserved for paid subscribers. So we have 2 levels. We have basic paid subscribers, and then we have what we call founding strategists. And the founding strategists are sort of our board of directors, if you will. But it includes all of our podcast guests are founding strategists. And we have a monthly Zoom. But normally on the month, we have a speaker. It's just Ponch and I, where people can ask us anything. And we always like to share who we've recorded with that we've not yet published. We talk a lot about the work that we have in the hopper. People ask us a lot of professional questions, so it's a way to get access to us that way. But it's a learning community, so that's what we're trying to build. We're trying to build. It's not a stone monument to Boyd. You know, Boyd is certainly the example that we're following, and it is a living memorial to him. But it's a living, growing memorial that's always adapting and always changing, and that's what we think he would have liked. He would not have liked the statue of himself, and it's not a Boyd statue, and it's not there just to defend John Boyd, although as we said earlier, that ends up being an unfortunate part of the business because he is so widely misunderstood. But that misunderstanding can serve you well. That's one of my articles. If you go to the Start Here page, you can see where I have an article about misunderstanding Boyd and why it's an advantage if your opponents are the ones that misunderstand Boyd. So,
yeah.
yeah.
Oh mate, that's an awesome resource. It's it must have took a long time to put that together.
Yeah, we're growing and we're growing and we get, it's network-centric warfare, right? It's network-centric learning, it's network-centric business. So we're growing. We grow with a lot of other Substacks. The ones that are in our community that we recommend have a lot of them have been guests on our show, or they're in similar, they're pursuing similar complexity learnings that we are. So we try to, it's not meant to be static though. And it's not meant to be a, I don't know, like sometimes I get a direct message like, hey, I need to know what your politics are. Or, hey, I need you to talk politically. We'd love to know. And I said, you know what? My right wing friends think I'm left wing, and my left wing friends think I'm right wing. So I must be doing something right. In fact, I'll tell you, one of our next podcast that we publish, you'll hear it here first on the Waggle Room, but it's a returning guest. Dr. Adrian Bijan is one of the world's leading experts on thermodynamics. He has a book out called Diversity and Freedom about basically the scientific underpinnings behind things. And it's not, the title might not be what people think, but it is rooted in very solid science, and his books are phenomenal.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that because Ponch mentioned that as well when I spoke to him, that you were having that guy on and what the subject was about. Yeah.
It was about 2 hours of recording. It could have been 15. I mean, he's just such a fascinating guy, and he's such a generous guy with his time, and he's such a phenomenal teacher. And he's the guy who proposed construct the law. I mean, he's on our show. It's great. And I think that so many synergies with Boyd. It's really, it's good stuff. But, also too, we do a lot of work with veterans and PTSD. Ponch and I are both veterans. We have a sponsor for our podcast, Ember Health here in New York, here in Manhattan. It's been a guest on our show, Dr. Nico Grunman. They do ketamine IV drip therapy to treat depression and PTSD. And they have very high success rates, a lot of data. And we'll be pushing out another episode with him shortly. But veterans and trauma has been a big topic. Of course, Boyd, but people go on there and they're like, well, I thought this was all about Boyd or all about Marshall McLuhan or whatever, but they realize it's pretty interdisciplinary. I always joke this, we can close with this, but I always joke, I guess people in the UK will get it, but I always joke, yeah, we're like Paul McCartney and John Lennon, like collaborating. I think Ponch, the way we work together, Ponch is much more the neuroscience, engineering, mathematics guy. Like, it could be very real world and, very like John Lennon, right? Like very to the point, this is what it is. I'm the liberal arts guy. I'm the philosophy, history guy. So maybe I'm a little more like Paul McCartney, like a little more melodic. But we complement each other well. And like, we go at this nonstop. I mean, we're constantly interacting and figuring out like what was this from, where do we find this, let's try this here. So from a collaborative standpoint, we really have a good time. It's funny, we've only been a guest on a podcast together twice. It's usually one of the.
Yeah, I was wondering about that. Because
hey, if anybody wants to have us on, if you want to have us both on, we'd love to.
But I'll have you both.
Yeah, we we've only, to my memory, I think it was the War Room with Aaron McLean, and then it's another one that doesn't exist anymore, but we were dual guests. We've done a lot of X Live, so we're on X a fair bit. We also have done Substack Live. In fact,
Yeah,
I
that
don't
was
know.
good. I did. Well, I came on one of yours, didn't I? That was good. It was because well, it was with Mike Jones.
Yeah, with Mike. Yeah, Mike has a great podcast. I think there's a lot of other ones too where I've been a guest and then Brian's been a guest separately, because again, we do talk about the same stuff in very different
Yeah,
perspectives. So sometimes people like that, or they want to talk about the flow system, which Brian's the co-author. So, but yeah, I mean, we're all, I mean, people will tell you, we always reply to questions, but with, in fact, I wound up writing an article. Somebody wrote me like a nasty gram about like, why don't you leave the comments open for anybody? Why do you only make it for paid subscribers? And the reason is really simple. Anybody that puts skin in the game with us, when they leave a comment or ask a question, we know it's serious,
yeah.
right?
No, that's a fair point.
I don't have time to filter through all the comments about what they think my mother must be like or whatever, that's targeted at me personally. I just don't have the time or the
No,
interest. So yeah, I think the
I
title of the
don't blame
article,
you.
the title of that article was called "You're Not Owed a Microphone." So
Oh, mate, that's awesome. I mean, so the last question I ask everybody, right, is from your perspective, what is the signal we're failing to see?
I think the signal that we're failing to see is that we could be totally wrong. And if we're not open to that, we'll never learn. And it's come up a lot lately where Punch is better at calling it out than I am. I tend to ignore it and just whatever, but Punch, I know this is, if you had him on the show, this definitely vexes him. It vexes me too. When people acknowledge and accept things that are from the inquiry of science, and we talked about this with Professor Bijan yesterday, when all of a sudden they would negate something because it no longer aligns with their politics, I think that
Yeah,
that's a very dangerous and slippery slope. So I think that's what people are failing to see, is that they're failing to challenge assumptions. So they get bad signals and then they're disoriented and then they could be wrong, or then they double down on their own BS. They quadruple down. Facts don't work. They can't, in other words, that they can't reorient. And I think what they're failing to see is that they have sovereign power over their own orientation. And it's not only sovereign power of your own orientation, it's also sovereign responsibility to write your own orientation and rewrite your own orientation and challenge your assumptions, because otherwise you just become an automaton and
yeah,
you become somebody else's bot. And that's why McLuhan is so interesting to me, because he talks about how, again, our technology and our environment and whatever, all those things work us over, and bias is real. And, if I think with the group, I think with the herd, I have to be open to the fact that I could be wrong. And I think that that's what people are failing to see, the need to be open. Boyd was very clear about this. He's like, if you think that anything that I'm writing is in granite or gospel or absolute truth, then take it out right now and burn it. Because what it's telling me is that you're not learning and you're not open to pursuing truth. And if you're not learning and you're not open to pursuing truth, you're only going to get misled.
yeah. That's a great signal. Well,
Yeah.
I'm not going to tell you because you'll have to watch, but
Okay.
you'll be very, very interested in what Ponch said when I asked him that question.
Oh, so you did record with Punch.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, well,
Yeah, you'll be
not,
very interested.
I say you go one, I say you go two, and then I say you have us both on the
That
third.
It'd be an awesome blimmin' act. You give up so much of your time. Christ.
I always love to make sure, I have 4 levels of professional improv training, so I always like to put it to good use. So,
Yeah, right, everyone that's listening, go out, subscribe to everything that Moose is doing. It's absolutely fantastic, and Ponch as well. It's well worth your time and effort. You won't be disappointed. So I just want to say a massive thanks, mate, for coming on and spending the time
hey,
talking about all this
I
stuff.
have a question for you.
Go on.
first of all, I was waiting for my compliment that the curtains match the hive shape that you
Yeah,
have.
yeah.
It just. So I have a question for you. So when we spoke and we talked about, I had you on our show and you talked all about bees. I have become just enthralled with bees. Like it's just the most amazing thing. And I've got to see some hives close up.
Awesome.
And I've become, there's some Instagram heads that you've seen, I'm sure, like there's these women that go around and they
Yeah.
rescue beehives and they don't wear masks or whatever. I think they're crazy, but whatever. Have you seen this thing? It's like a device that you hook into your house and it's like a plastic, I think, and you can basically host a hive in your house.
Yeah.
Have you seen, is that
I have
legit?
seen it. Yeah. That is, somebody's made that. And it's cool, and it's like, because it's awesome to see, isn't it? The
Yeah.
only problem, every time I see that, I just think that has got disaster written all over it.
Tell
And
me
the only
more.
reason
Why is it,
the only reason it's got disaster written is because it's the way that the bees will never always stay there. Very, very unusual.
is it
because they're
limiting
gonna
to them?
swarm.
Is it too small?
It's not that it's too small. It's just, most of the ones I've seen, they're completely see-through. But bees don't live in that environment. You think I mean, so the way you have to look at it is even in from a beekeeper's perspective, a hive is a false environment, really. It's man-made. Bees find their own cavity to live in, and they're always in the dark, right?
So I'm gonna challenge you then. I
Go
wonder
on.
if the medium is the message, because you just described that technology and environment work us over completely. I wonder if, I'm sure it applies to bees too.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
100%. It's yeah.
We'll have to get
They
you
will
into,
always win out.
we'll have to get you into Marshall McLuhan, because it'll only make your,
Definitely.
it'll make your understanding of Boyd even better. So anyway,
Hey, thanks, mate.
thanks for having me on, Mick. It's always a
No
pleasure.
worries.
Anytime.